How is that different from an Episcopal minister talking about current affairs in the sermon in a Christian church on Sunday?
It's very different because that minister still, when he goes to Congress, cannot wave his Bible and talk about canon law as him being the only person that can interpret canon law. Well, the imam dismisses me as having any authority because I don't have a degree in Sharia and because I'm not from Al-Azhar or trained in Saudi Arabia.
That's entirely untrue. That's untrue. I mean, Muslim activists...
I've been involved in 9 or 10 mosques.
I mean, you know, there was recently the Pew survey that came out that actually, you know, completely discredits what you just said. It shows that the vast majority of American Muslims do not want, you know, some kind of theocratic state.
Who's representing Muslims today? Who is it? It's the organizations that are calling themselves Islamic and the leadership at the mosques. The Muslims you're reporting are not represented, don't exist as far as the American media is concerned, because they don't have an organized representation.
But there's no clamp on the community. It's a diverse community. You're welcome to start your own mosque and become the imam of that mosque. The Muslim community, by its very nature, is a grassroots community. It is not a hierarchy. We don't have a pope, we don't have a church. And so anybody is welcome to be active and to represent their views and be, you know, and speak for themselves.
I believe that the future of Islam is the 70% of Muslims that aren't mosque going, that are teaching their kids to be Muslim, raise them with the tradition of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, but yet feel that the current leadership are problematic.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I don't agree with the mosque leadership in every mosque in America. There are definitely imams who have views that I disagree with, just as most Muslims do. I mean, that is the reality of any religious discourse, right?
Are not a monolith. I mean, let's talk about Chicago, where I'm very active. We have a Bosnian mosque, we have a Nigerian mosque, we have, you know, an African American indigenous mosque, a mosque that is visited by young, you know, professionals downtown, and they're not all of the same political inclinations or the same, you know, interpretations of Islam. I mean, obviously they share the basics, but it's a diverse community, and it's wrong for Zuhdi to refer to the mosque-going Muslims as this monolith. That's, you know, it's a very sensational and alarmist view.
The product coming out of the Islamic Society of North America, the Muslim Student Association, Council on American Islam, the product coming out of it is basically, we condemn terrorism as an action, but you will not condemn the means that the terrorists seek. I've never seen you name Hamas, Al-Qaeda by name. These fatwas are all generic, and currently what the American public is seeing as representing the Muslim community is a monolith. Okay. And one of the things I want to add is that you mentioned before...
First of all, hold on a second. Is that true?
That's absolutely untrue. As a matter of fact, we have condemned 9/11 by name and Al-Qaeda by name several times. I've done so personally, so I can talk in authority.
I've heard you support Hamas's building of hospitals and institutions as an organization.
You've just shifted your question. Are you asking me if I condemn terrorism or if I condemn Hamas?
Do you condemn organizations which use terrorism as an action?
But I don't
then you would condemn the IDF and the Israeli army as well, because they also use, they also murder civilians.
That's apologetic. That's lack of moral courage as a Muslim.
Hold on one second.
To give a reason and deflect it to somebody else.
This is an important debate, and I think we've heard it before, but rather than become derailed on the Arab-Israeli conflict and the identity of Hamas, let's talk about the mechanisms for expressing the moderation that you've talked about in the documentary. I think what is unclear to me, I mean, I saw you know, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Tehran after 9/11 and in other Muslim capitals around the world. Today, Ms. Zakaria, who speaks for them? Those people who marched in solidarity to the United States, who clearly had an instinctive gut-level outrage for terrorism as we understand it, yet I don't necessarily see anyone representing them. I see those pictures, and I actually went back online and looked at those pictures, and they were still as powerful, you know, years later as they are today. Who represents those people?
Absolutely, and I think that that's a crucial point. The fact is that in a lot of Muslim countries, people are sick to death of terrorism. You know, in a country like Pakistan, where I'm from, people are just tired of the repeated suicide bombings, you know, the atmosphere of insecurity, of fear, and the problem is that the clash of civilizations thesis, right, which kind of shows that all that these extremists do is hurt Westerners, takes away the fact that there are so many Muslim victims of terror. And if anything, if the Western media really needs to promote, if anything, that the fact that Muslims are dying of terrorism all the time, the problem is that the issue of the war on terror has been, you know, inextricably intertwined with American imperialism. And it's very hard for people to ideologically separate the two. And that, I think, is the crucial point that has to be made, is that, you know, being against American imperialism does not mean that you have to, Al-Qaeda or support extremist agenda.
Mr. Rehab, if, as is the case, and as we speak, it's the day after the New York Times has finally declared in their lead editorial that the U.S. should immediately withdraw from Iraq, if current U.S. policy in Iraq, if criticism of that is a mainstream position in the United States, representing people from Democratic, Republican, conservative, and liberal views, if U.S. policy in Iraq, criticism of that is a mainstream position, what can you do beyond criticizing American policy, which everyone is doing in the United States, to declare an outrage or an opposition to the tactics of terror going on in Iraq from the pulpit in the mosques? Where are the lines? What can you say? What can you not say?
Well, I give sermons at some of Chicago's largest mosques, and I stand up at the pulpit and I condemn acts of terrorism unequivocally. And whether or not the individuals who commit these acts claim to have grievances that they think are legitimate, that's not an excuse. You just do not kill innocent civilians in the name of Islam or the name of God under any circumstances.
And if I was in a mosque, I would be likely to hear or unlikely to hear a sermon against suicide bombing, against the idea that you go to paradise if you're a martyr in a suicide bombing?
I think you're increasingly likely to hear it because of the reformers who are working in the mosque and succeeding in getting the moderate message across. And
increasingly likely to hear it? What do you think that means to you?
I would agree with that. In that the preaching of violence, I've never seen it. I've been in so many mosques, I've never seen it. But what we're missing is the linkage of the political Islam, of the dreams of the Islamic State to terrorism. To blame American foreign policy and then these provocative terms of imperialism and colonialism, they're going to find some justification for it and deflect it from really what the problem is, and you can condemn the means from here to eternity, but unless you condemn the goals that they seek, you're going to have immoral people that seek those goals. And until Islamic organizations say, you know what, we may be a minority, and the problem is they're flourishing in this minority politics stuff, that if you go to a majority Muslim country, they're used to these debates that we're having, and they won't tell me don't go to the media,
Is it possible the sort of dream of an Islamic State in American Muslim terms is not that much different from a sort of Jewish dream that everyone's going to observe the Sabbath, or a Christian dream that there's going to be some...
As long as you can separate personal Sharia. I practice Sharia. My wedding document, my marriage document, my will and testament is all based on Sharia. But I do not take Sharia into government. So I don't call it that. I go by principles and morals. As long as Muslims can separate that, I'm all for whatever you call it.
But I have one question for you that came up to me when I watched the documentaries. Do you really think that the people who wanted personal arbitration tribunals in Ontario, who wanted those Sharia tribunals, do you really think that those people are the same as the terrorists in Al-Qaeda? I mean, do you really think that?
Very different, but the problem is the Muslim community
But you conflate them in the documentary.
You call them Islamic. You refer to them as Islamists.
They're militant. Al-Qaeda is militant Islamists.
So
the end is very similar.
Well, let's remind people of what you're referring to in the documentary. A call for an Islamic resolution of a dispute between two Muslims in Denmark, right?
That was a medieval. His resolution was. But Sharia is stuck in the 16th century.
No, that's true. That is true. That is true. Yet,
and I would agree
that
it needs to be.
How could you have Sharia courts established on medieval law?
Is it possible to view? I mean, believe me, the Danes have an issue with this kind of violence. He was offering Sharia as a solution. Is it possible that a parallel court system in a country like Denmark could constitute one way of addressing a problem of intersectarian warfare?
There's no way it could ameliorate. There's no way it could become inspired by the humanism of Europe if it became separate and parallel. The women of Canada were the Muslim women of Canada were the ones most vociferously against parallel Sharia courts because of the fact that they would get forced and coerced behind the scenes into these courts.
And I don't disagree with that. But